Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes running fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Straight Shift. I literally just got off the red eye flying into Charlotte last night from Las Vegas. I was at SEMA all this week. And for those of you who don't know or who missed it, I'm mentioning it on the last podcast. SEMA stands for the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association. And SEMA, that show in Las Vegas every year, it's basically the world's largest convention for car-related crap. I mean, it's just amazing. And I use the term crap very affectionately because it's tools, it's equipment, it's aftermarket parts, wheels and tires and go fast parts and hot rod parts and things you look at and go, I don't even know what that is, but I want it. It's a show that's not open to the public. It's open to people in the industry, mostly people that have some sort of, aftermarket shop, whether, they're into tires or they do audio systems or they do performance parts or they, jack up your Jeep or just the regular service industry, whether it's a body shop or a mechanic shop. All those folks come to this conference every year to look around at all the cool things that they could buy and sell and put in their shop. And it's like a candy store for car people. It's just amazing. And I was very honored to be out there under the Rust Rescue, the TV show that I do. One of our primary sponsors, Zero Rust, which, oh my God, is an amazing product. It is as easy to apply as house paint, but you paint it onto metal and it never rusts again. It's insanely, ridiculously wonderful. And we use it on every car frame and floorboards and everything that come into our shop down in Lancaster, South Carolina, where we filmed the TV show. Love those guys. And I'm so grateful to them for bringing me and my co-host Taz out there to make appearances in their booth and get to meet some of the fans of the show. And I think we took probably a good 100 selfies this week. And it was just a really great opportunity to get out there and see everybody and see our other sponsors. And another thing that was great for me amongst all the work and the crazy 16-hour work days was getting to see some of my girlfriends in the industry. There's a group of women that are just changing the automotive industry from the inside from so many different angles. And this is the one time a year when we're all in the same place and we get to hang out together. And I got to see, one of my very dear friends, Bogey, who has her own garage where she educates women and helps them get into the industry and build their careers in the industry and create scholarships. And she and all of the girls did a great build of this beautiful Chevy truck. And they got that into a booth at SEMA as an all-female build. This is the second year she's done it. That's really, really cool. She's also one of the hosts of All Girls Garage on Motor Trend TV. And our other dear friend, Amy Matinat, who owns a really cool shop up in Vermont. And she was one of my first podcast guests when I first started the Straight Shift. And she did a great talk about how to winterize your car. So we are heading into winter. So you might want to actually go back to the beginning to one of my first podcasts where I had Amy as my guest talking about winterizing your car. So that was awesome. And it was just so energizing to be around all these amazing women and get to see these close friends. And one of the things that we kind of talked about was the changes that are happening in the industry, not just the ones that we are causing to happen because we want to change the industry for the better, but also just what's happening with the technology and the changes in the industry. So today, I want to talk about a little bit of a deeper topic than I normally go into. I try and keep this podcast light and fun, but this is a really critical topic because we're kind of on the cusp of a revolution within the automotive industry. And, you hear about in the media all the time about how we need to reduce our dependency on foreign oil. We've got to kind of reduce our dependency in general on fossil fuels and other non-renewable resources, because we've got to save the planet. We've got to reduce the greenhouse gases. Oh my gosh, I should not podcast while I'm this jet lagged. So bear with me, folks. But, as a result, the world is starting to move towards more, we've seen hybrid vehicles. We're moving more and more towards true plug-in electric vehicles. Obviously Tesla is kind of one of the big brands that's leading that charge and doing things differently. But it's more than just kind of moving towards those vehicles and starting to see them on the roads and, ooh, maybe do I want one or do I not want one? It's bigger than that. Here in the US, we have such a kind of a small focus because we sit there and we look at our own problems and our own issues. And the US is very different from an automotive standpoint because, we own more cars than the rest of the world. We have, all this space. We have less public transportation in Europe. The automobile is much more near and dear to our hearts in the US. And so changes in vehicles tend to happen a little bit slower here because, quite frankly, we're stubborn and we don't want to give up our cars and our petrol engines. But the rest of the world is moving faster, and we're starting to feel the pressure. There's a lot of countries out there that not only have they made a commitment to moving away from petrol-based cars, gasoline-powered engines, but they're actually to the point of banning petrol engine vehicles. Seriously, banning as in not allowed anymore. The petrol ban, like I said, has been led a lot by the European countries. And gas has always been so much more expensive in the rest of the world, particularly Europe, than it has been in the US. So they've always been motivated to find alternative means of technologies and transportations and powering vehicles because gas is just dang expensive. We bitch and moan here about, paying $3, $4 a gallon for gas. And, they've been paying $10 a gallon for years. So when we complain about gas prices, they just kind of look at us and be like, yeah, shut up. It's so much worse over there. Norway was one of the first countries to lead this ban on fossil fueled vehicles. And that ban will not go into effect until 2025. But then the Netherlands, Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, a lot of the Scandinavian countries, their bans go into effect at 2030. France and the United Kingdom, will be there by 2040. Heck, even China, who is one of the world's greatest users and abusers of fossil fuels in the world, they're the reason gas prices go up and that the greenhouse gases are going up. Because of all the industry that they have in China and the just bazillions of people that they have using all this stuff, even they have announced a ban. They don't have an exact date for when it's going to go into effect, but even China realizes we can't keep doing this. We've got to change because it's expensive. We're running out of these fuels. And, we've got to figure out some just different ways of living as human society so that, our children and grandchildren will continue to have a future on this planet. And I'm not going to get into politics. We're not going to talk about global warming or anything like that. I just want to talk about, how this shift towards electrical vehicles and away from gasoline-powered internal combustion engines is really going to affect the U.S. economy and even the global economy because there are some impacts that aren't really being talked about. And I think that they need to be because these changes are going to affect so many aspects of our lives. And it's going to have a fundamental impact to the U.S. economy, to jobs, and to just how we function as a society. So yeah, here we go. This is deep. Let me clarify, these bans that I'm talking about on gasoline-powered vehicles, the ban applies to new vehicle sales. So it's not like these European countries are going to go knocking on the doors of all their citizens and go, give me your keys. You can't have your petrol-powered car anymore. It's just new vehicle sales. The automakers and dealers are not going to be allowed to sell any new models that have internal combustion engines. They have to be all electric. And who knows, by then we may have, implemented some other types of alternative fuels, with between hydrogen vehicles and a lot of the other technologies that are being looked at. But right now, the focus is on electric vehicles. So that ban will apply to new vehicle sales. They're not going to come take away your current car. I would like to see them try. No one's taking my Maggie from me. But while the U.S. has made no such announcements on bans, we do have a couple of cities that are on board with this bandwagon. And not surprisingly, those cities are Los Angeles, California, and Seattle, Washington, probably the two most expensive places to have vehicles in the U.S. outside of New York City, which if you have a vehicle in New York City, you're just crazy anyway. And these cities have made a commitment to, banning these vehicles. Now keep in mind, and they've made that commitment to ban them by 2030, but that doesn't mean that these just individual cities are actually going to have any legal authority to enforce said ban. And of course, obviously the car makers in the US and the dealers and everybody else are going to probably fight it tooth and nail, but they've at least kind of put a stake in the sand and said, you know what? This is important. We have such a smog problem. We have emissions problems. We really need to commit to cleaning up our cities, improving our air quality. And a big part of that is, reducing the number of gasoline powered vehicles that are spewing stuff out their exhaust and contributing to the smog in these cities. And they've also kind of doubled down on that commitment by really pouring a lot of money into the infrastructure necessary to support all these electrical vehicles on the road, because it's a completely different infrastructure than it is for just gasoline powered vehicles. And, the gas tax in those cities and states is ridiculous anyway, and they'll probably jack it up even higher to make it even less attractive to drive gasoline powered vehicles, because, gas in Los Angeles is already like $5 a gallon. So they'll probably jack it up to $10. I don't know if that's true. I'm just speculating based on, history and having lived in California for a few years. But if you really look at kind of how we spend money on gas every year, Americans households, 20% of our household budgets go to transportation every single year. And specifically, an average of $2,500 is what we spend per year just on the gasoline for said transportation. So, gasoline fuel is one of the largest transportation expenses for families and businesses in America. We use nearly 150 billion with a B gallons of gas per year at a cost of over $300 billion is what we spend on gas in America. And that money doesn't tend to stay in the local economies. Most of that money leaves both the local and even regional economies, and even leaves our country and goes to the oil producing countries. It goes outside the regions for transportation of that fuel into our local areas. So, we're spending all this money on gas, and it's not going back into our local communities and our local economies and generating jobs in our neighborhoods. So that's another reason that we kind of need to look at the overall impact to our economy of the transportation industry in general. But that leaves the question of, are electric vehicles really the answer to these problems? Or do they have some issues of their own that just aren't being talked about? Despite all the buzz around electric cars, they still only account for about 2% of new car sales in the US. And that's even with the up to $7,500, I think it is, in tax credits. So why are we not buying more of these? Well, they're still expensive. Battery-powered vehicles are still really darn expensive. Have you looked at how much a Tesla is? I mean, even something as small as a little Nissan Leaf is still ridiculously expensive for what you get. You're just not getting your bang for your buck. And so looking at it from a business case. So even let's just say you could afford one of these, I can't. Most, middle-class Americans and certainly lower-class Americans cannot afford these vehicles. But let's say you can afford, to spend, 60, 70, even 100 grand on one of these vehicles. If you look at, what you're going to save on gas each year, it just doesn't even come close to making a business case. So Americans who buy electric vehicles shouldn't be doing it. They may think they're doing it, but doing the math, they're not saving any money by buying an electric vehicle at all. It's just more of a, making you feel better about your, impact on the environment and, okay, I'm going to save the planet by driving an electric car. Well, probably not. But, there's a bigger impact than just to what we're looking at with the environment. We've got to look at how these changes, the shift to electric vehicles is going to impact the overall economy. And it's going to hit due to a few different reasons. So if you'll bear with me for a second, I need to dust off my college degree. My degree is actually in quantitative economics from Stanford, and they don't teach, car chick is not a degree that you can get in college. So, I rarely have used my quantitative economics degree. pretty much what I learned in that degree is you can get the economic study to say whatever the politician wants it to say, depending on how you pick your data and your variables. So, this is what I got out of 4 years in college, but I am going to dust off that hat because I have really been looking deeply at a lot of this data. I've been reading a lot of economic reports, which, let me tell you, folks, that is some seriously dry reading. If you're having trouble sleeping, that's a great place to start. One of the big areas to look at is in how this is going to disrupt kind of the distribution of oil, petroleum around the world. On the positive side, at least in the US, the rollout of EVs worldwide is going to eventually reduce the overall global demand for oil, for petroleum. My peeps at Stanford, these are the folks that actually use their economics degree. And I don't know any of these guys personally, but, hey, they're my peeps. I trust them. There's a huge, the Hoover Institute is there. So Stanford's one of the top economic schools in the country. And these guys love to crunch their data. And they did a study recently, and they're looking at the global demand for oil and how that's going to change over time with the implementation of electric vehicles, especially looking at these bans in a lot of the European countries and around the world. What's that really going to do? They're estimating that global demand for oil will actually peak in 2020 at 100 million barrels per day. And that's just staggering. I can't even wrap my brain around that. But that's probably going to drop to 70 million barrels or less per day by 2030. So in just a 10-year span, we're going to cut the use of petrol by 30%, which is pretty cool. Now, the oil exporting countries don't think this is cool. This is going to have the biggest impact on places like Venezuela, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and even Russia, because they're one of the biggest exporters of petroleum in the world, and that makes up a huge part of their economy. So we're already seeing a lot of the geopolitical impacts of that pending change as these countries see the writing on the wall and what it's going to do to their economies. And, we're talking, again, Venezuela, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Russia, the Middle East. These are not the most stable, political areas in the world anyway. And so I think, a lot of that's going to get even hairier as these countries literally start to panic about what changes this is going to mean for their economies. Looking a little bit closer to home, obviously, we produce oil, around, Texas, around the Southwest, up in Alaska. I think for the U.S., because most of that oil, if we keep it here, it's not necessarily going to be a bad thing. I mean, obviously, the people that own those oil fields, aren't happy about this. But, it is going to help our local environments and, our economy. We still are so dependent on that foreign oil that overall that part at least is going to help us. But looking a little more specifically at the tax impacts here at home, back, I think it was like episode 34 or 35 of The Straight Shift, I talked about the Prius tax. We're already seeing the impact of more fuel-efficient vehicles and non-gas-powered vehicles on our gas tax revenues. And the U.S. road infrastructure is largely funded by the taxes that we pay on every gallon of gas that we buy. And vehicles have been getting more fuel efficient because of the requirements, the CAFE standards the government rolls out, and plus the demand, we want more fuel efficient vehicles because we don't like spending money at the gas station. That's money that we're not able to spend on other things in life that are more important, like, food and lodging and other fun things. We don't like paying for gas. So, over time, we've really been seeing our infrastructure budget that is funded by this gas tax has been shrinking. And that's an issue in other countries as well. And, we've already got a crumbling transportation infrastructure here in the U.S. I'm not going to go into any more detail because I did cover it in the Prius tax episode. But we are having to look, both our government and governments abroad are having to look at how they change the tax structure so that, we still can generate the tax revenue that we need to support our transportation infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our railroad tracks, all that good stuff. Just charging taxes on every gallon of gas, that's already not flying. It's already not enough. And that's only going to rapidly diminish. My Stanford peeps, their study showed that, by 2030, we're going to lose $50 billion in petroleum taxes. That's just going to vanish out of the U.S. economy because we're not going to be using as much gas. So there's kind of a pro and a con to that. We're just going to have to change the way we do things. And what that's going to mean to us as consumers is we're still going to be paying taxes. They're just going to get us in another way. So, be aware that the tax structure is going to change, and it'll move from being taxed on gas, which we don't really think about because we just look at the price of gas and we forget how much of that is taxes, to something that's probably going to be a little more overt, a little more intrusive, that just, screams tax and bright neon lights, and it's going to make us all very cranky. But I think the biggest impact that I don't think enough people are talking about is the impact of electric vehicles on jobs. The industry-wide shift over to these electrical vehicles, this is really going to signal a monumental change because it changes the way vehicles are manufactured. And now you have to get a little bit nerdy and think about how vehicles are manufactured. And if you've never been to a plant to see how cars are made, you really need to try and do that at some point because it's really quite fascinating. Here in Charlotte, we're only a couple hours from BMW's production plant down in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I have been down there and I've done the plant tour, and you get to do some other fun stuff. I got to drive a SUV sideways down a rock wall and go play on the racetrack and stuff like that. But the plant tour was also very, very interesting, very educational. The electric vehicles, just to break this down really simply, they have fewer parts. While they have their own complexities, obviously with all these batteries and how that works, it really boils down to they have fewer parts than gasoline-powered vehicles do. So if they have fewer parts, it means that fewer workers are needed to put them together, to assemble them. And this issue was at the core of the United Auto Workers strike that's happened back at the end of September and ran for, I think, about 40 days, directed at General Motors, because, they were complaining partly about the fact that they were going to lose their jobs as GM is starting to convert factories over to producing more electric vehicles. And people are losing their jobs. The union believes, and correctly so, that electric vehicles pose a real risk to traditional auto workers. This is very similar to the issues that we're facing in the energy sector, where, all these, coal miners and people who have been working all their lives, in the coal industry have been losing their jobs. As we're moving to different types of energy sources, this is the exact same thing. And so the auto workers they see the writing on the wall too, and they're really worried about it. While hybrid cars, like the Prius, that combines the electric drive with the conventional internal combustion engine. So hybrid vehicles are great. They actually require more labor. It's on average, about 9.2 man hours compared with about 6.2 man hours for just a typical normal gas-powered vehicle. So hybrid cars need more people to make them, but we're kind of shifting through that hybrid phase and into purely electrical vehicles, the all-electrical vehicles that run completely on batteries. That cut down to less than 4 man hours. So that's a lot less workers. And it's a different skill set that's required to assemble those vehicles. Now, the other problem with it is producing those battery packs themselves. Yes, that's extremely complicated, and I'm not even going to pretend to know how that works. But it's also a largely automated process that uses a lot more robotics and computers than it does humans, partly in nature to the very dangerous chemicals and materials that are used to make those types of batteries. It's quite frankly not safe for humans to handle that. Therefore, robotics are used. But the bottom line is it doesn't translate into, we can't just take our traditional auto workers and retrain them and have them go make batteries for electric cars. It's just not going to work that way. And while the most manufacturers, GM and Ford and Honda and Toyota, most of them make their own internal combustion engines for their regular cars, those battery packs, they don't tend to produce those themselves. They farm those out to a small handful of global suppliers that make them for everybody. And they're made in Japan. Panasonic is one of the big makers of those batteries. South Korea has a firm, LG Chemical. They make those big global conglomerates over in Asia that make up such a huge part of their economy. They're the ones making all this stuff. They're not being made by Americans in America. It's just part of the global economy. They can produce them so much more cheaply over there. And they've been working on it for a long time because they go into a lot of other electronic components that they have also been manufacturing for years, like TVs and cell phones and all that stuff. So this shift is going to impact, American jobs in so many ways. The traditional auto workers are going to be displaced to a large extent. And it's just not something that it's going to be easy to retrain them and kind of shift them into different roles and, and still have jobs. And, that's really sad. It's also the nature of just change. And we can't necessarily put the genie back in the bottle. And it's not just going to impact the auto manufacturers and the workers that make the cars. You got to look at the entire automotive industry. The dealers are looking at this, their service departments, all of my friends that own shops around the country that are mechanics, the electric cars have fewer things that need to be maintained. It's mostly computers and electronics. It's not things that need, oil changes and other fluid changes that, make up the bread and butter of the automotive service and repair industries. When your normal car breaks down, it's some sort of mechanical part frequently, and they change that part, you change a bunch of oil, you have this regularly scheduled maintenance that is kind of the cash flow for your dealership service departments and your independent shops. And that cash flow is going to start drying up as you have more electric vehicles that just don't have these parts. They don't have those fluids. And, when they break, it's going to be, these electronic things, it's computers and sensors. And we're seeing that in a lot of the technology. And yeah, you can swap those out, but it's just not the same. And we're going to need fewer mechanics, and they're going to have different skill sets. They're going to be more computer people than they're going to be, hands-on mechanical people. So it's a huge fundamental shift. And the typical dealer is, probably going to lose, about $1,300, in maintenance and repairs, over a 5-year ownership cycle versus, what they would have, servicing cars for owners of internal combustion vehicles. So this is going to have a big impact to more than just the automakers. It's going to go into our service and repair industries and and even to gas stations. We're not going to need as many gas stations, so we're not going to need as many people working at gas stations. So again, this affects the U.S. economy on so many levels. And we're even already seeing some of it with vehicles requiring less maintenance with, oil changes used to be every 3,000 miles. And, now it's more 5,000 to 7,000 miles, sometimes as much as 10,000. But me, don't get me started on that's being too long. But this is, we're starting to see these changes. It's been kind of a slippery slope in that industry. And it's only going to change. And we're just going to have to see because, gas stations even, they're, are they just going to switch out their gas pumps to, basically electric pumps? So you go and, put electricity in your car instead of gasoline in your car? Well, the problem with that is most people recharge their electric vehicles at home. Or if they have a charging station in the parking lot, at their office where they work, you stop for gas on your way to places. You don't stop for electricity. You plug it in because it takes longer. You can refuel your car at a gas pump in, a few minutes. Recharging your car takes hours. So, stopping at an electricity station is just not realistic. So it's going to be a big change in the fueling of cars as well. So, kind of in summary, and I decided not to take a break like I normally do on this podcast, mostly because I was just kind of on a roll with this and wanted to get it all out. But this is going to be a fundamental shift in not just the U.S. economy, but the global economy. And the automotive industry is one of the key indicators of the U.S. economy. That's why, 10 plus years ago when all that fiasco with the financial markets and the big, bailout of, GM and Chrysler happened. And for those businesses to change so much has such a huge impact and a trickle-down effect across the U.S. economy. And, the bottom line is change is inevitable. We see this in so many different areas. I mentioned the coal workers, but, I spent this last week Ubering all over Las Vegas, Nevada. And, thank you to all the Uber drivers who got me where I needed to go on time. I appreciate it. But, remember when Uber came out, Uber and Lyft, the taxi industry was freaking out. They're still freaking out. They're still, desperately trying to fight it because, taxi drivers are being put out of work because everybody has shifted over to Uber because it's cheaper and it's more convenient. And I feel bad when, people in a certain industry, in a certain segment, start to lose their livelihoods because technology changes, and those technological changes shift how we as a society operate, how we live our lives. And, Uber has done that. We're going to see it more and more as self-driving cars become available, because now all the people that went from driving taxis to driving Ubers, they're going to be out of a job eventually because the cars are just going to drive themselves, and you're not even going to need those people. This is just what happens in our society. Technology changes, society changes with it, and we get left behind if we're not ready for these changes. Change is coming. Are you ready for it? Are any of us ready for it? Do we really have a choice? So this is the food for thought that I am just going to leave you with as I get ready to go on vacation next week, where I hope not to think about any of these things except nice sun and some froofy drinks. And then when we get back, I'm going to be hitting up the Charlotte International Auto Show, and we'll be getting out a video on that. Again, if you want to see a lot of the cool stuff at SEMA and just some of the ridiculous, crazy stuff that my Rust Rescue host and I did there, that season finale of Rust Rescue should be released probably after Thanksgiving. If you have not seen Rust Rescue or you want to keep up with that, you can go to rustrescuetv.com. All of season 1 is available to stream online for free right now. Season 2 will be starting up, so that's what I'm doing when I'm not buying cars. Thanks for listening to my rambling, and sorry for getting kind of deep and even bordering a little bit on the political side, but this is a change that's going to be happening rapidly, and we really started talking about it, very frankly, at SEMA this year. Granted, we were talking about it over some drinks, but, that always spurs some good conversation. So food for thought, folks, but no matter whether you're driving a petrol vehicle, a hybrid vehicle, an electric vehicle, please do so safely. I'm out of here.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.